Let's return now to events in Israel and in Gaza. We can speak to Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister and former Israeli Ambassador to the UK. Welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Regev. First of all, I want to ask you about the situation at the Al-Shifa hospital. Here at the BBC, we've heard from medics, from people inside that hospital who say that it is being directly targeted by Israeli missiles. Is that the case?
I don't believe so. You've got to remember that the head of the hospital was appointed by Hamas, and if Hamas is still controlling the hospital, so people are restricted in what they can say. They can only follow the Hamas line. That is unfortunately the reality.
I just want clarity on that. You said you don't think so. So is that a no? That hospital is not being directly targeted by Israeli missiles?
We don't directly target hospitals. We target Hamas, and we target Hamas positions. That is our policy.
But if they are operating, as you contend, from that hospital, then would you say you are directly targeting Hamas within that hospital?
I don't believe that's correct. I haven't been updated of exactly what's going on the ground, but from previous experience, I know we don't target hospitals, we target Hamas positions. Now, Hamas has, of course, turned the area of the hospital into a war zone by establishing their military headquarters directly underneath the hospital. That's been proven. Everyone in Gaza knows that to be true.
So how do you target Hamas if they operate, as you say, from underneath that hospital? How do you target them directly without indirectly impacting other people, patients, doctors, medical staff in that hospital?
So you send in your ground forces and you're as surgical as you can be in a difficult combat situation. At the same time, there is an exit available to people who want to leave. Israel has not surrounded the hospital in a way that no one can leave. They can leave, I believe it's through the east, and they have a safe corridor there. And people who are patients, we've also said we're willing to take people in ambulances, help them to leave. It's a very difficult situation because, as you know, Hamas has deliberately built its military infrastructure under the hospital. Its desire to use the patients there and the whole medical structure as a civilian shield, as a human shield for its military machine.
So as far as you know, have people been able to make use of that offer to leave that hospital safely, to be evacuated via ambulance that's put on by the Israeli Defense Forces?
Correct. We've had people leave, and we've had, I think it was yesterday, we had 70,000 people or 50,000 people. The day before was 70,000 people. What we've discovered as we are taking apart Hamas's control of that part of the Gaza Strip, people who were kept there by force, who couldn't leave, are now more than happy to leave, and they're moving out of our corridor. The civilian population, we've asked them to leave, as you know, for over 3 weeks now. We've suggested that they leave, and most of them voted with their feet and left. They wanted to get out of a combat zone, and Hamas had the opposite policy, though. Hamas wanted to keep them there as human shields, forced at gunpoint people to stay. And now as their rule there in that part of the Gaza Strip is falling apart, people are free to move.
I want to speak with you specifically about this hospital, though, because there's also, as you know, many people within that hospital saying that babies on incubators are not being able to be kept alive because they don't have enough fuel to keep those incubators going. Nearly 24 hours ago, the Israeli government told the BBC that they would help the movement of babies. They would help facilitate it from that hospital to keep them alive. Has that happened? Can you confirm? And if so, how many babies and how? Where are they going?
I cannot confirm, but I do know that there was talk and there were ambulances to be provided for moving babies. Obviously, we want to do everything we can to keep babies alive. But isn't that ultimately the real story here? That though Israel is perceived as being the enemy of the Palestinians, yes, we're making every effort to safeguard Palestinian civilians, while Hamas is doing the exact opposite, that they're using babies as human shields. Though we shouldn't be surprised they've taken babies from Israel as hostage. Who takes people? What sort of barbarians take babies hostage, yes, abduct them and take them back to some dungeon in Gaza and uses their own babies, Palestinian babies, as shields for their war machine?
So you can confirm that the Israeli government, the IDF, are doing everything they can to help evacuate those babies and keep them alive?
Exactly.
But you don't know how many and if it's happened?
I don't have the details because the operation is ongoing, yes, and we probably would only announce something once it's been successfully completed. If it's ongoing, we wouldn't talk about it for fear that Hamas would try to obstruct it. As they have in the past, they've shot at these humanitarian corridors to try to prevent people leaving. Isn't it absurd that Hamas wants Gazan civilians to die to protect their military machine? It really is an inversion. In normal countries like Britain, you've just commemorated Remembrance Day. In normal countries, the job of the military is to protect the civilians. Hamas turns it upside down. They use their civilians to protect their military. It really is disgusting.
So let me ask you about the military operation. 5 weeks on the mission to destroy Hamas. Militarily, what have you achieved?
Well, obviously it's still work in progress, but we have achieved a lot. And the mere fact that we are at the very center of the Hamas military machine in Gaza City is a sign that we're making substantial progress. And we are taking apart that machine. And the fact that the civilian population of Gaza, of that part of Gaza, is now free from Hamas rule and is free to flee out of the combat zone where Hamas was keeping them, I think that shows that we're making progress. It won't be over tomorrow. It'll take time, but we will destroy Hamas's military machine and their political control over Gaza. And in doing so, it's not just good for us. It's not just good for Israel that we don't have to live in fear of this terrorist enclave on our southern border, but it's good for the people of Gaza who deserve better than this radical, extreme terrorist regime that doesn't give a hoot about the well-being of the people of Gaza.
Mr. Regev, just in the past few moments, the Hamas government in Gaza have released their latest death toll. They say 11,180 people have been killed there in the past 5 weeks. A few days ago, the US Secretary of State, your staunchest ally, of course, said that far too many Palestinians have been killed, far too many suffered. Do you agree that too many have been killed in this operation?
We didn't want to see a single Palestinian civilian killed in this operation. That's why we repeatedly asked people to leave combat zones. Repeatedly. We urged people to leave, and the vast majority did leave. Every civilian killed is a tragedy. We don't want to see a single one killed. We didn't want to see people caught up in the crossfire between the Israeli Defense Forces and the Hamas terrorists. But on that number that you mentioned at the beginning, you correctly said that these are figures put out by the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health there in Gaza. You have no idea how many of them are civilians and how many were the Hamas terrorists, combatants. As you know, they don't wear uniforms. And so I suppose from Hamas's point of view, everyone killed is a civilian. At least that's what they want the world to believe.
But you do understand and acknowledge that many children are being killed. You may dispute the number, but we see footage every day of children being pulled from the rubble, of children dying in hospitals. You do acknowledge that many children, innocent children, are dying in this conflict.
Very sadly, one child killed is more than we should have. We don't want to see a single child caught up in the crossfire. But you said correctly that children are pulled from the rubble, and you've seen pictures of that. And that's because Hamas controls the visual image coming out of Gaza. Have you seen a single killed Hamas terrorist pulled from the rubble? Not one. And the reason is Hamas controls the visual images coming out, just as they can control the voices coming out of the hospital. Why is it that you have not seen on the BBC or anywhere else, frankly, a single Hamas terrorist who's been hit by an Israeli strike? Not one. Is it because we have not hit a single person, a single combatant? Or is it because Hamas is hiding those images for its own reasons?
You talked about people being urged to move south. Again, we have testimony from many people in the south of Gaza, just from our own correspondent there in the past few hours, of strikes, military strikes, where he was in supposedly a safe zone, and he saw dead bodies personally himself, a BBC correspondent. And this is supposed to be a safe zone where, as you say, Israel has urged civilians to move to for their own safety. Do you acknowledge that at this point, nowhere in Gaza is safe?
I don't acknowledge that. It's a matter of calculating risk. And obviously, to be in the center of a war zone, a zone of intense conflict, like northern Gaza, like Gaza City, that's much more dangerous than being in the south. In the south, Hamas is still firing rockets at Israel, and so we're striking back. But there are areas where there isn't a Hamas infrastructure. There's specifically an area on the Mediterranean coast, on the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which is safe. We're urging people to go there. We're urging our friends and allies and neighbors to establish their field hospitals. The French are bringing a hospital ship close to the coast to take in people. We're trying to do a major humanitarian effort there in the south. But once again, in places like Khan Yunis, where there's a strong Hamas infrastructure, they are shooting at us and we will fight back.
Let me ask you about the hostages. 240, it's thought, taken on October the 7th into Gaza. They've been there for 5 weeks. We hear very little from the government about operations, and the explanation is obviously you need to keep any negotiations secret. But the reality is many Israelis fear that these people are possibly going to pay with their own lives the cost of this military operation. Can you say one way or another whether you believe that that is happening right now?
I think as we increase the military pressure on Hamas, we are increasing the chances of getting our hostages out.
Do you believe they're alive?
Well, we don't know they're all alive, but we know that our assumption is that the overwhelming majority are alive. And as a result, the only way to get them out is to beef up the pressure on Hamas. And if there will be an agreement to release hostages, we, of course, are ready to do that in the framework of a ceasefire. And we think it's a matter of there being pressure on Hamas. Look,
do you see a ceasefire happening in the immediate future?
Well, it all depends if there's going to be a release of hostages or not, because we want to see our people released.
So you need to see them released before you'll agree to stop firing on Gaza?
As you said correctly, there are 250 people who were kidnapped, abducted and taken to Gaza. Of them, 32 children, of them babies and infants. We have no illusions about Hamas. They're not going to release our people suddenly because they've become humanitarians. They're going to release our people if they're under enormous pressure, and we're applying that pressure, and we believe that can facilitate their release.
OK, Mark Regev, thank you very much for joining us from Tel Aviv.
Thanks for having me.